Well, good morning. We're glad you decided to join with us today. We are in a series that I titled Snapshot, where we're looking at people from the Old Testament that did extraordinary things, just kind of a snapshot into their life. We're not digging into an entire book of the Old Testament. We're kind of hopping around a little bit and looking at specific stories, specific characters, and what we can learn from that. Today we're going to talk about a really interesting story and a name you probably know, but maybe you don't know the full story of, or maybe you do. But we're going to talk about Gideon. And when I think of Gideon, I think of a quote from William Shakespeare. I know that sounds kind of funny, but basically this is what comes to mind. It says, some people are born great, some people achieve greatness, and some people have greatness thrust upon them. And whenever I think of Gideon, I think of that quote of William Shakespeare. Maybe by the end of the story you can think of which one of those three Gideon seems to fall into, but Gideon did do a pretty great thing, and we're going to talk about what that process was and how he got there today. So look, just to give you a little background of what's going on in Gideon's time, we find Gideon's story in the book of Judges. It spans from chapter 6 all the way to chapter 8 or so. And if you know anything about Israel, when Moses led Israel out of captivity from Egypt, they were basically 12 tribes kind of unified together under the banner of Israel, but they didn't do everything together. It was kind of a loose fitting thing. And for about a 200 to 300 year period, they lived that way, kind of a confederacy of tribes. It's kind of an interesting thing. But during that time, they didn't have a king, they didn't have a ruler. This is long before David, long before any of those events happened. There would be people that God would raise up to lead Israel at specific times. It was usually because Israel would turn their backs on God and start worshiping other gods or forgetting God and just turning away and doing evil in His sight. So when you read the book of Judges, that is it. It is a roller coaster ride. Israel does something that turns them away from God. God allows them to be either captured by somebody or some rough things happen. And then God raises up a judge to lead Israel. Those judges would often decide between the tribes things that were happening, just like a ruler would, but they weren't that official ruler or one, but that's the person of wisdom. But often those judges were the people that would come and rescue and kind of guide and direct where Israel would go. So it's kind of a weird part of history. And now we're in the middle of Judges, so we're coming to another story. There's many stories in Judges. I just happened to pull out Gideon. Many of you have probably heard of Gideon Bibles that are in all kinds of hotel rooms all over the world. But the story of Gideon is really interesting. At this point in time, the people of Israel again had turned their back on God. They'd started worshiping Baal and Asherah, the Canaanite gods. They had forgotten their own God. And because of this, God had allowed the Midianites and surrounding communities and countries or people to oppress them, to be very cruel to them, specifically the Midianites. So much so to the point where the Israelites were living in caves and kind of hiding in the wilderness so that they wouldn't be harmed by them. As soon as they planted crops, the Midianites would come in and destroy those crops. They just did horrible things to them. And that's during this time. So I want to pick up our story in Judges chapter 6, verses 11 through 15. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree of Ophrah, which belonged to Joash of the clan of Abiezer. Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of the winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "Mighty hero, the Lord is with you." "Sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us up out of Egypt, but now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites?" Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I'm sending you." "But Lord," Gideon replied, "how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family. What was Gideon's position here in Israel? He was the least of the smallest tribe. Now, he had servants. He was somebody of note in that sense. His family owned land or had wealth to a degree, but they were the least of anyone, especially in his tribe. Nobody was looking to Gideon to get anything done. Nobody was looking to Gideon to be a leader. He was somebody, actually, it said that he was threshing wheat in a winepress so that the Midianites wouldn't see it and come and take it away from them. Because that's kind of what would happen. Anytime that something good would happen, they would come and take it away. And so they were starving, they were hungry, they were struggling. That was kind of the story. So I always like to think that Gideon probably would have been the last one picked on the playground for dodgeball or whatever it might be. But here we are. In verse 16 through 24, we're going to kind of pick up the story. It says, "Then the Lord said to him, I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man." Gideon replied, "If you are truly going to help me, show me a sign to prove that it is really the Lord speaking to me. Don't go away until I come back and bring my offering to you." He answered, "I will stay here until you return." And Gideon hurried home. He cooked a young goat, and with a basket of flour he baked some bread without yeast. Then, carrying the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot, he brought them out and presented them to the angel who was under the great tree. The angel of God said to him, "Place the meat and the unleavened bread on this rock and pour the broth over it." And Gideon did it as he was told. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the bread with the tip of his staff, and fire flamed up from the rock and consumed all he had brought. And then the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized it was an angel of the Lord, he cried out, "O sovereign Lord, I am doomed. I have seen an angel of the Lord face to face." "It's all right," the Lord replied. "Do not be afraid. You will not die." And Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and named it Yahweh-Shalom, which means the Lord is peace. The altar remains in Ophrah, in the land of the clan of Abiezer, to this day. Now, Gideon didn't know who he was talking to. I'll give him this. He had some boldness. Like, he recognizes this person, probably thought he was a prophet. Maybe he understood that he was from God in some way. But basically said, hey, if God's for us, why is all this happening? Why has God abandoned us? Why are these bad things happening? And we're going to find out in the story that he deals with this. But Gideon's asking these questions. The angel of the Lord, and when you see angel of the Lord, many people believe, a lot of theologians believe, that that's actually the presence of Jesus coming before his birth. But the angel of the Lord comes and speaks to him. And Gideon has no idea who he's talking to. But here's the thing that I love about Gideon. When he was presented with this problem, when he was looking at this and he's going, man, I want to figure out if this is truly God or not. I want to understand what's going on. What did he do? He went and he got an offering and he worshiped God. So the first point today is he worshiped. Gideon didn't fully understand what was happening. This is what I love about the posture of Gideon. It's why I think God chose Gideon, because Gideon could have freaked out and just ran away, could have done a lot of different things. But the first reaction that he had was to bring worship, to seek God, to give an offering and to worship him at this altar. And I think that's something that we can learn from this example, that when God's putting something on our hearts, or we're put together with a challenge and we're trying to figure out, what's going on, is to go to a place of worship, to go to a place of prayer. That should be our first response. We often think that our first response should be just immediate obedience, and yeah, that will be true in some cases, but in this case, and most often when God's placing something on our heart, he's usually doing it over a period of time, and we need to worship and pray and check and see that it's truly him that's speaking to us. Gideon was testing, is this God? Should I listen? He was skeptical. Man, God hadn't been talking to him. The Midianites had been oppressing him. He even said, why has God abandoned us? And yet, when faced with this challenge, faced with this angel of the Lord in the presence of God, he worshiped. And he stopped and took a step back from there. I'm sure the whole experience rocked him. I'm sure it was huge. It would have probably messed up anybody for that moment. I don't think he was like, oh, cool, hey, you're God, let me go. No, he freaked out a little bit, and he went and got something prepared. I mean, he prepared a goat, baked bread, brought all this stuff back as an offering. And then when he realized this is truly God, he built an altar and worshiped him there. Such a cool story, which leads us to the very next thing. The whole reason Israel was hiding from the Midianites was that they had turned their backs on God. They started worshiping idols. This was the pattern for Israel. They would set up these idols to Baal and Asherah poles, and they would worship him there. And so in their land, they had brought all these false gods in, which we know from the Ten Commandments that God said, I am one God, I'm the only God, I'm a jealous God, don't put any other gods before me. But yet Israel had done that. They turned their back on him. So we're going to find out what Gideon does in this situation. See, we're not that different. We often, when things are going well, we often forget God. We often get off path. We start to put other things before God. Now, we probably don't erect idols to other gods, but we get busy with sports. We get busy with our careers. We get busy with our hobbies. We get busy with all these other things, and we put God on the back burner. Gideon obviously recognized God, but yet they had these altars to Baal and these Asherah poles on their land. They were worshiping. They're like hedging their bets, I guess. We're just going to pray to any God that will listen to us. But look at Judges 6:25 through 26. It says, that night the Lord said to Gideon, take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that is 7 years old, pull down your father's altar to Baal, and cut down the Asherah pole standing beside it. Then build an altar to the Lord your God here on the hilltop sanctuary, lay in the stones carefully. Sacrifice the bull as a burnt offering on the altar, using as fuel the wood from the Asherah pole you cut down. So the second thing is burn the idols. So the first thing that he does is he worships God. The second thing is he gets rid of the idols and the things that had brought the Midianites upon the people, the places that they had turned their backs on God. He sacrificed that. He actually used it to build the altar and to offer another sacrifice to God. So he continued to worship, but he got rid of the idols in the process. Now, if you were reading the story, I didn't read it all here. He took some people with him, and he did it at night because he didn't want the people in the land, the people from his tribe or his father's household, to stop him. Because if you were to do this during the day, everybody would see it. Everybody would notice it. Like, what in the world is Gideon doing up there? Why is he cutting down the Asherah? They would have freaked out. But he did it at night. And so when they woke up the next morning, they found this, and they were upset. But his father kind of steps in and says, hey, let Baal defend himself. And it was these were on his father's land, these poles. So his father was a part of the problem. But yet his father had the wisdom enough to step in. We're not that different from Israel again. We put up idols all the time. Sometimes the difficulties we have in our life, not because we did one thing or another, but because we've turned our back on God and we've let other things get in the way of our relationship with Him. We've lost sight of Him. And when things do come, we don't turn to Him, we turn to other things. So people turn to alcohol or drugs or pornography or whatever to kind of appease that feeling because they're overwhelmed by everything else. Or get consumed with whatever they pour themselves into to get that momentary relief, but we forget God, the one that can truly give us peace and all those things. And some of that stuff is not bad. Man, sports and all those things are not bad things. But when we let them get in the way, when we let them become medication in a way, and we neglect to spend time with God and we neglect the things that are important, then they become problems. Really, an idol can be anything that replaces God in our lives. So the first step in all of this is when we're confronted by the presence of God, one way or another, is to stop and pray and worship. Reconnect with God. Find out what God's speaking to us. And then in this case, and in many of our cases, if we realize where the problem is, get rid of the idols. Get rid of those things in our lives that are putting up roadblocks between us and God. So those are kind of the first two steps in the process that he goes through. The third one, I think, will have an even bigger impact in our lives. We know these first two, and intuitively, if we've been around church for a while, we probably understand that. You're kind of like, Pastor, yeah, you say that a lot. Yeah, we do need to worship God more, and we do need to get rid of the things that hinder us. Whole parable of the sowers around that very thing. But look at this. This is the part that I think people get really thrown off on. And the third point is, it's okay to doubt. It's okay to doubt God. It's okay to doubt in those situations. God gives us room for that. Look at verses 33 of 40 of chapter 6. It says, soon afterward, the armies of Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east formed an alliance against Israel and crossed the Jordan, camping in the valley of Jezreel. Then the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon with power. He blew a ram's horn as a call to arms, and the men of the clan of Abiezer came to him. He also sent messengers throughout Manasseh, Asherah, Zebulun, Naphtali, summoning the warriors, and all of them responded. Then Gideon said to God, if you are truly going to use me to rescue Israel as promised, prove it to me in this way. I will put a wool fleece on the threshing floor tonight. If the fleece is wet and the dew in the morning, but the ground is dry, then I will know that you are going to help me rescue Israel as you promised. And that is just what happened. When Gideon got up early the next morning, he squeezed the fleece and wrung out a whole bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, please don't be angry with me, but let me make one more request. Let me use the fleece for one more test. This time, let the fleece remain dry while the ground around it is wet with dew. So that night, God did what Gideon asked. The fleece was dry in the morning, and the ground was covered with dew. God was patient with Gideon. Just like he was with Moses, they both had doubts. They both questioned what God was calling. Moses was questioning, like, who am I to do these things? Gideon's the same thing. Remember, they were the least. Gideon was the least in his tribe, and his tribe was the least in all of Israel. Yet Gideon had some boldness, but he went to God and said, well, look, show me. And God just kind of smiled and did it. God knows what we need. Gideon had the boldness, and he doubted God. He questioned God, and that's okay. Actually, I truly believe this. I believe that we truly can't fully have a relationship with God without doubt. I know that seems kind of counterintuitive, but when we doubt, we wrestle with what's right. When we doubt, we wrestle with who God is. And when God shows himself through that wrestling, when you're truly seeking to understand, God will show himself, and that will solidify our relationship with him. Some people push God away and they doubt God, but they don't really truly seek to see if he's God. Maybe they're mad at him, maybe they're mad at the church, whatever. That's a different story. But I'm talking about truly questioning, are you real? Who are you? And truly seek to understand who God is. God will respond. He won't punish, he'll respond, because he enjoys that challenge. He enjoys that we're seeking to know the truth, that we just haven't pushed away and ignored. So he humored Gideon with the fleece. Look, there was no clear leaders in Israel at that time. They were this confederate of tribes but there wasn't one clear leader. They kind of worked together. There wasn't a judge in Israel at that time. God was patient. He answered him. All these things are amazing, but they lead up to what truly made Gideon a hero. And all these things build upon each other. And the last thing is, Gideon obeyed without question when the time came. He'd been on this journey with God, and he started with that encounter when God said, I'm going to use you. And he's like, I'm the least of anything. And he stopped and he worshiped. He built the altar. He got rid of the idols. Spent a time doubting, asking God to show him, to give him that confidence. And that's what leads up to this point. Remember, all the armies had gathered against Israel, and Gideon had been empowered by God to act in a very unusual way. So I want to pick up the story at the beginning of chapter 7. So 7 verse 1, so Gideon and his army got up early and went as far as the spring of Hurried. The armies of Midian were camped north of them in the valley near the hill of Moriah. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many warriors with you. If I let you fight with the Midianites, the Israelites will boast to me that they saved themselves by their own strength. Therefore, tell the people, whoever is timid or afraid may leave this mountain and go home. So 22,000 of them went home, leaving nearly 10,000 who were willing to fight. But the Lord told Gideon, there are still too many. Bring them down to the spring, and I will test them to determine who will go with you and who will not. When Gideon took his warriors down to the water, the Lord told him, divide the men into 2 groups. In one group, put all those who cup water in their hands and lap it with their tongues like dogs. In the other group, put all the people who kneel down and drink with their mouths in the stream. Only 300 of the men drank with their hands. All the others got down on their knees and drank with their mouths in the stream. Then the Lord told Gideon, with these 300 men I will rescue you and give you victory over the Midianites. Send all the others home. So Gideon collected the provisions and the ram's horns of the other warriors and sent them home, and he kept the 300 men with him. Crazy, right? Went from basically 32,000 men down to 300. But did you notice that Gideon didn't question God in these moments? He already questioned God. He already tested God. He had already come to that place that God solidified who he was. And at this point, Gideon's acting because of the faith that has been built over time. If we're not building that faith over time, when those big moments come, we don't know how to respond or react. And that's when we get stuck. That's when we miss those opportunities that God puts in front of us. That's when we often find ourselves in places and situations that we did not intend to be. I believe that without that time of doubt, without that time of wrestling with God, that Gideon would not have trusted God enough to whittle the army down to 300 men. Gideon did exactly what God told him to do. And man, the story is amazing. You can go on and read the rest of the story in there, where he basically has everybody surround. They're down in this valley. There's a dream. Actually, God tells Gideon, like, hey, if you want to know that you're going to win, if you're afraid, go down and get on the skirt of the camp of the Midianites and just listen. And he went down there and he heard 2 guys talking about a dream that he had. And the guy had a dream about this thing falling on the tent and crushing his tent. And the other guy said, man, that means that God's giving the Israelites us, that they're going to conquer us. And Gideon heard this, and he went up and it emboldened him. And he had his men surround the valley with basically these torches with clay pots on them. And then when he sounded the horn, and it was, probably kind of dark out, when he sounded the horn, everybody crushed their pots, and it looked like there was just thousands of people surrounding the Midianites. It sent them into confusion. They started fighting against each other, and then they fled, and then they chased after the Midianites. And God gave them the victory with those 300 men by creating the illusion of a larger crowd. But God did that to show him and to show them that it was by his power that they were rescued, not just by sheer might. And Gideon obeyed through that entire process. Really cool thing, the story goes on even further from there. But here's the point. Just to kind of wrap it up and summarize it. When we're walking with God, there are going to be times when we feel a prompting. There are going to be times when we run into some unusual situations, or we feel like we need to do something, or we need to make decisions. The first thing we need to do is go to God in prayer. Go to God in worship. Seek Him first in that. Sometimes in those situations, not all the time, there may be idols and things that are in the way that God's going to ask us to set aside. Sometimes God asks us to set certain things aside for a period of time, kind of like a fast. You see people all the time, they're fast social media, they'll fast certain TV shows, whatever it may be, food, whatever it may be, to draw closer to God. Remember, we did the spiritual disciplines, that was part of it. But getting rid of those idols, getting rid of those things that are hindering us from growing in our relationship with God, hindering us from hearing Him. And then don't be afraid to doubt. I'm not saying we need to doubt every time. But look, any big decision, people come to me all the time, and I know even in my own experience, when I've made big decisions, there's moments of doubt. Is this really God speaking to me? Is this what's going to happen? It seems kind of crazy. It seems audacious. Is that really what God wants me to do? Every step of our lives, Jennifer and I had to come to those decisions, and there was doubt in there. There was questions, but at the end of the day, we acted. And I'm sure there are many times that we didn't act, and we missed some opportunities, and we made some mistakes, and we've paid for some of those mistakes. But the key is when we go to God in worship, when we seek His face, when we get rid of the things that are hindering us, and we wrestle with God, it solidifies our faith. And the more we do that, the stronger our faith gets, so that when God asks us to do something that seems weird or audacious or strange, we trust Him. And God is always faithful. We've talked about provision. Man, God does and uses some pretty interesting things. I think back to Jonah. He used a whale to provide transportation to rescue Jonah. Even in the story of Joseph a couple weeks ago, God used these situations of slavery, these situations of imprisonment to get Joseph where he needed to be to rescue his family and the country and surrounding lands. God does amazing things that are outside of what we would normally see, and it just shows His presence and His power. It solidifies our faith in Him. And that's what I'm hoping for today. I don't know what you're challenged with. I don't know what's before you, what decisions need to be made, but the first step is always to pray and to worship and to seek Him. And God will guide you through the rest of the steps. That's always the starting point. I hope this has been encouraging to you today. I want to take a minute and just pray over you. Father, Lord, I pray that we would be like Gideon. Lord, that when we're faced with a challenge, when we're faced with something we don't understand, that we would seek You first. Lord, that we would be willing to do what it took to get to that place, whether it's getting rid of idols in our lives, whether it's wrestling with You on what we believe and where we're at. Father, I pray that at the end of the day, we would listen and follow You. And Lord, I pray that Your hand of blessing would be upon each person that's watching this today. We thank You for what You're doing in and through us. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you again for worshiping with us. We'll see you again next time.